on.
You're on? We'd like to welcome you to the 150th anniversary of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. You have the pleasure of being in the presence of the person who created this great railroad, me. My name is William Sharon.
Good morning, Mr. Shyster. Mr. Sharon.
I created this railroad on May 8, 1867, after presenting my plan to my fellow Bank of California trustees, William Ralston and Darius Ogden Mills. The first train to steam on these rails, the line arrived in Reno on August 6, 1869. Now, due to the fact that no rails had reached Reno yet, the engine had to be dismantled and hauled by wagon to Carson City. Now, the reason for creating this great railroad was to make it easier to haul mined ore from the mines to the stamping mills in Silver City and Carson City. On the return trips, we would be able to bring back supplies such as machinery, lumber, and other necessary goods to Virginia City. Supplies that would help the mines go deeper and be more productive. This method of transportation would also help reduce wood costs from $29 to $21 per 1,000 feet, saving almost $1 million a year in freight costs that we're currently paying the Teamsters.
What about the Teamsters? Don't you care if they're able to provide for their families and make a living?
Well, I believe Shakespeare said it best in Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 3, line 87. No. I do love a good Shakespeare quote, don't you?
Oh yes, I forgot about your flair for the dramatic and your oratory skills. I should explain. I believe a Teamster in your time period would be considered a truck driver. And
I need to do a lot of editing on this.
All across the United States and Canada. However, in our time, the term Teamster referred to a person who drove a team of draft animals, usually a wagon drawn by oxen, horses, or mules. This term was common by the middle of the 1800s and into the early 1900s.
Yes, and since they were, at the time, the only means
Gotta blur that.
they can charge whatever exorbitant amount they wanted. Why, the amount they were charging per load was highway robbery.
Oh, yes.
I've gotta blur all that.
It's good that the Teamsters should have the market cornered on unscrupulous behavior.
Unscrupulous? Who do you call me? Unscrupulous. I'm a great businessman. I was just trying to save the investors a lot of money in freight costs.
Yes, and the fact that you profited from it as well was just a happy bonus, I suppose.
Looking snazzy.
Now let's get back to the railroad.
Yes, the crookedest railroad in the world.
Who are you calling crooked? I'm a very honest businessman.
I wasn't calling you crooked.
Thank you.
Not that it wouldn't fit. But in this instance, I was referring to the fact that in order to make the descent of 1,575 feet between Virginia City and the Carson River Mills, the lead mining surveyor, Isaac James, designed the route, managing to keep the downhill grade at or below 2.2% by winding the track around the many hills between the two locations. It is said that the amount of track curved around these hills was enough to make 17 complete circles. Now, the total distance between Virginia City and the Carson River Mills was 13.5 miles. However, the completed track with all its curves traveled a distance of 21 miles in that 13.5-mile stretch, making it the crookedest railroad in the world.
Well, thank you, Miss Kathleen, for telling these fine people what I was about to tell them. You have a habit of interrupting a gentleman in the middle of a presentation?
I do. When I believe there is a chance that facts will not be presented accurately.
My facts are always accurate. Does your husband allow you to interrupt him in such a manner?
I, sir, am not married.
I can understand why. You're a bit of a shrew.
A shrew?
Yes. Haven't you ever read anything from William Shakespeare, the Bard? The greatest writer there ever was?
Of course I have. All properly educated young ladies are acquainted with the classics.
Well, apparently he has written a play called Taming of the Shrew. And it appears to be
There it
about
goes.
you. The shrew in the play is named Truckee. Coincidence? I think not.
Yes, but she was called Catherine. I am called Kathleen. There is a difference.
Yes, but I believe you would both be called Kate. Plain Kate or Bonnie Kate. Sometimes Kate Curse. But Kate, the prettiest Kate in Christendom. Kate of Kate Hall, my super dainty Kate. Kate is of me, Kate, of my consolation.
Excuse me, sir. And if I remember my Shakespeare correctly, this is about the time when she says, asses are made to bear, and so are you.
Oh, come, you wasp. I fear you are too angry.
If I be waspish, best beware my sting. Now we're getting a bit off topic.
In the play, her husband, Petruchio, turns her into the most loving and obedient wife the world has ever seen. A copy should be given to every husband on his wedding day.
Well, I never.
You know, I've always prided myself on being able to turn a phrase. In this case, I would rename this play Taming of the Shrew, A Gentleman's Guide to a Happy Marriage. Well, enough about the railroad. Let's talk about me. I was born in Springfield, Ohio on January 9th, 1821 to William Sharon and the former Susan K. Kirk. Now, they were Quakers and they lived on a farm. Now, from an early age, I always fancied myself as a business owner. So I decided to go into the flatboat business, and I was able to get my father to give me money to buy a flatboat. Now, I loaded it down with supplies from the river towns of Ohio. But I ran into a rough patch of water just outside of Louisville.
Yes, I believe those would be called, rapids.
Thank you. Yes, losing half of my cargo trying to shoot the rapids. So I moved back to the farm. I stayed there for about 3 years before entering the University of Ohio in Athens, Ohio. Then I received my law degree in St. Louis, Missouri in 1845. Although I really didn't practice law at that time due to my poor health. And I didn't realize how long I would have to spend in entry-level servitude before attaining a fair footing and making a decent living.
So you didn't want to have to actually work for a living?
That had nothing to do with it. I just didn't want to take that long to be a benefit to my fellow man.
Oh, right. A benefit to your fellow man.
Yes, a benefit to my fellow man. So instead, I decided to go into the mercantile business in Carrollton, Illinois. And I set up shop and I did quite well. Then gold fever started to go around the country, so I decided to move west in 1849. Now, I set up shop in August of that year in Sacramento. My shop did quite well until it was swept away by floodwaters that following winter. I decided not to set up another shop, and I moved to San Francisco where I went into real estate. I stayed in that business for 14 years and I did quite well. I put away about $150,000 in that time. But I'm sad to say I lost all that due to what people would call a high-risk stock speculation.
See, this story is a real rags to riches, to rags to riches.
That's when I made the acquaintance of Mr. Ralston, who had just founded the Bank of California. Now, he hired me to head up the Virginia City branch of that bank.
And the rest, as they say, is history. To put this into context, let me tell you where Virginia City was in its evolution. As you know, people started heading west when gold fever hit in 1848.
I said that already.
Not everyone found their wealth in California, though. And as early as 1850, several prospectors were finding small amounts of gold in the Carson Valley. Others were prospecting on the east side of Mount Davidson, which was also known for a time as Sun Mountain. In amongst the gold was this blue stuff, which they immediately discarded, thinking it was worthless. After it was discovered that this worthless stuff was actually silver and worth a great deal, the onslaught of miners who went to California turned themselves around and flooded this area. The amount of silver found in Virginia City, Gold Hill, and the surrounding vicinity would become what would be known as the Comstock Lode. The amount of silver ore that was found would wind up eclipsing that of the Mother Lode, the gold strike in California. Some of the people who would reap the benefits of this find are Sandy Bowers, Adolph Sutro, James Flood, Senator George Hurst, and John Mackey. In the next decade, Virginia City and the Comstock included an area which encompassed Gold Hill, Silver City, and an array of mills and reducing plants along 6 Mile Canyon. During this time period as well, the area went through several periods of boom and bust. And at its peak, Virginia City had grown into a city of 20,000 people. But by 1865, all was not looking well for the Comstock lode, and it hit its first real crisis of production. The surface strikes were played out, and machinery that enabled access to deeper stopes and winzes was exceptionally expensive. Timber would also be needed to shore up the enormous weight of the mountain, along with adding protection from cave-ins from boiling water and from rock that was so hot that it flowed like liquid. Miners left the area by the hundreds in search of newly discovered strikes in the White Pine Mountains of eastern Nevada.
They couldn't see further than the end of their noses. That was okay for those who were greedy and wanted to make a quick killing. They had no idea of the richness that lay in the mountains.
You're calling them greedy? Something about pots and kettles comes to mind.
In my position as head of the Virginia City Bank branch of the Bank of California, I was in a position to hear all information about the Comstock. Now, while I very rarely entered the mines myself, I had my own very qualified engineer going into all the mines unchecked, inspecting the condition of each mine, and taking samples wherever he wanted. Now, he would report the assay results to me by laying a report on my desk every day at 5 p.m. And I kept this information highly secret and confidential. I also had several of the best geologists, consultants, and assayers in my employ. Now, I paid them quite handsomely to assure their silence, and to make sure that they would remain trustworthy and loyal, I had their information cross-checked. Now, I knew there was more ore in the mountain, and we just needed a way to get to it in a cost-effective and productive manner. Now, as I said before, there was train fever going around all of this whole country. So that's when I went and talked to Darius and William Ralston about creating a railroad up here. I mean, why hadn't we thought about it before? All we needed to do was find a way to finance it.
This is where his nefarious methods went into high gear. You see, there was plenty of excitement across the entire country about building railroads to unite one end to the other. Mr. Sharon counted on and used that excitement to intimidate citizens in Washoe, Lyon, Ormsby, and Story counties into agreeing to fund bonds to pay for the railroad. He convinced them that if they didn't put the railroads where he wanted them to go, their communities would cease to exist. And to maximize his threat, he commissioned the survey of a route going north and northeast from Virginia City, which would then connect with the transcontinental line, completely bypassing those communities. In his way of putting it, do it and live, or refuse and die. And he was able to raise $1.2 million in a 2-month period.
While I refute your use of the term nefarious, I was indeed successful in accomplishing what I set out to do. And you forgot to mention that while it was uncommon for organizers to invest their own money into a project, William, Darius, and I invested an additional $1.5 million of our own money, or rather the bank's. And because they would receive a lot of money from this endeavor, we were able to collect another $387,000 from the remaining independent mine owners. Now, from this group, I was able to create the Union Milling and Mining Company. Now, as I said, there had been several proposals to build a railroad in this area. Several charters had been approved by the Nevada legislature between 1861 and 1865, but no action had been taken to proceed with it. So again, in 1867, I created the Virginia and Truckee Railroad Company, but some revisions had to be made to the route plan. So on March 5th, 1868, the final version of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad Company was formed with a route plan that went not only south to Carson City and Silver City, but also north to the Central Pacific Line and on to Reno. Now, on September 28, 1869, ground was broken and the first spike was driven into the first section of rail in American Flats by the new railroad superintendent, H.M. Urrington.
Poor Mr. Urrington. I'm so glad you were able to find something for him to do after you stole his mine from him.
I didn't steal his mine. He sold it to me.
That's not how I heard it.
Just forget what you heard. It's a bunch of lies.
Oh, this is gonna make so much comedy on YouTube. I do gotta do a lot of editing and blurring.
At the beginning of the project, we had 15 construction camps along the route with over 1,600 workmen employed, most of which were Chinese. Now, at the beginning of the project, we figured they would only be able to make about a half a mile a day in laying track. But after I got Urrington on the job, within a fortnight, he was able to get a mile and a half a day out of those gold bricks. Now, we couldn't go around all the hills, so we had to make tunnels through some of them. There were 7. 3 of these tunnels are still in use today after some repairs and restorations. Excuse me. Now, the line between Virginia City and Carson City, again, was completed on November 29, 1869. But the first shipment to run on these rails happened a number of days before that on November 19, 1869. And it went from the Yellow Jacket Mine in Gold Hill to the Stamping Mills in Carson City. Now, this first shipment contained 7 carloads of ore at about 8.5 tons per load. And that was just the beginning.
In addition to the Lion, the first locomotive that was purchased, they bought 4 more by the end of 1869, which were sent to Reno. And, just like the Lion, each locomotive was given a name. They were Ormsby, Story, Virginia, and Carson. The Ormsby and the Story were, again, dismantled and hauled by wagon to Carson City, since it still had yet to connect with Reno. The Virginia and the Carson, however, were supposed to go right into service and construction work, so they were taken up to Virginia City completely assembled. Excuse me. They were taken by a straining ox team through the Truckee meadows as far as Steamboat Springs. They were needless to say, their weight was a problem going up the treacherous Geiger grade. The Carson got completely stuck in a pothole and had to be left for the summer. The appropriately named Virginia finally made it into the city behind a yoke of 18 bellowing oxen.
So, we were still giving jobs to those poor, unfortunate teamsters you're so concerned about.
There was such an excitement about the railroads being built. People would actually take picnic lunches to some of the construction sites and watch the men as they worked. It was a thrilling experience watching history being made.
Now, at its high point, the Virginia and Truckee Railroad would run about 24 locomotives and up to 40 trips a day. Needless to say, with that much traffic, accidents are bound to happen. The first accident the B&T had was in April of 1870 when 2 locomotives collided. Now, in addition to the locomotives being constructed, we also had 2 coach cars, a mail car, and a baggage car being constructed in San Francisco. But not to be outdone, we had our own item of rolling stock being made in Carson yards. It was just a crude little car, but it became our club car. And it was named Julia Bulette.
Oh, well, that was appropriately named. A crude little car named for a crude little harlot.
Oh, come on, Miss Kathleen. She did a lot of terrible work for the citizens of Virginia City, especially the widows and orphans.
Oh, well, yes, that should be the different discussion for a different day. Once
Dang it.
those other cars arrived, passenger service was available. People would take excursions and to ride the train just for the fun of it. The newspaper in Carson, The Appeal, was quoted as saying, "Our people spend all their holidays riding over the new track." Mr. Garrington finally had to put a stop to it for safety reasons. Once the line to Reno was finally completed in August of 1872 and connected with the Central Pacific Railroad line, passenger travel increased dramatically. People would instead of going directly from Virginia City to Reno, however, the line went north from Carson City through Washoe Valley, allowing for excursions for picnics and swimming at the mansion of Eiley and Sandy Bowers. Mr. Bowers had passed on by then, and Mrs. Bowers had opened up the mansion as a rest stop for travelers. Of course, this also allowed for more trips to San Francisco.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You forgot to mention the first celebration that took place on that wonderful day in November of '69, when the first train pulled by the line arrived in Gold Hill. There are decorations. All the mine whistles blew. The fire department band played. The mayor of Gold Hill and the editor of the Gold Hill News gave speeches. But theirs could not compare to the eloquence of my discourse, as I vividly described the success and fortunes that lay ahead, the fame and renown that would come to our little corner of the world as a result of this small step.
Yes, I do have to admit you are a very effective and charismatic speaker. But I would have to say the finest celebration would have to have been Colonel Curry's Railroad Ball, which was held the following 4th of July in Carson City. Now, the Colonel was Carson City's first resident, and he spared no expense when it came to this ball. He hired a band for the exorbitant sum of $250. He had a large dance floor made. He even imported 6 fresh pineapples for display at the elegant and delicious buffet. The pineapples came all the way from Hawaii and cost $5 a piece.
And the libations flowed freely. As I recall, there was a special Virginia and Truckee punch that had 5 different kinds of rum and a large amount of the best French champagne. Of course, maybe a lover and connoisseur of fine wines manned the champagne bar at the party.
Oh, and Mr. Ralston came from San Francisco and made an appearance.
Oh, it was great to see William there, to see what we had accomplished. Now, by the time the Virginia and Truckee Railroad was fully functioning, Virginia City was seen as a cosmopolitan destination, as was New York City and San Francisco. And the Virginia and Truckee Railroad was an example of the opulence and elegance afforded dignitaries and wealthy passengers. And this was all because of the gold and silver that we were bringing out of the mines. Now, with the mines, the railroad, and the banks being successful, my partners and I were making a nice profit.
Nice profit, is that what you would call it?
Okay, we were putting back a tidy sum.
Tidy sum. Keep going, try again.
Okay, we were making a lot of money.
Ah.
William Ralston and I started buying properties in San Francisco. And when my wife got ill, I started spending more and more time there. Though I still had holdings in Nevada, and I still considered myself a resident of Virginia City, I decided to make a run for the Nevada Senate, the U.S. Senate representing Nevada, from the retiring James Nye. But I lost out to John P. Jones. But on my second run, I was successful, and I served between 1875 and 1881.
Yes. Thankfully, he just served 1 term.
Why thankful?
You should never have been elected in the first place. You were never in Washington. You were one of the most dishonest, scheming, conniving reprobates this area has ever seen. The Territorial Enterprise called you, quote, a hyena in human form who should be lashed naked from the haunts of civilization, end quote.
That was a bunch of lies. That writer of a newspaper was nothing but yellow journalism. I think in your time it would be known as fake news.
Yellow Pages. It's known as the Yellow Pages.
Let's start with your acquisition of the mines and the founding of the Union Milling and Mining Company. First, you acquired of all the reducing mills.
I didn't acquire those, the bank did.
You were the bank. Most of the mines were suffering due to the First Depression and decline of ore. You allowed them to overextend themselves and then foreclosed on 7 of the biggest mills along the Carson River. That's what you started the company with. And then you added other smaller properties in the next couple of years so that the bank
them
had a
mean, yellow
monopolistic grip around the throats of the mine.
Hold on for a second. I know what you're talking about. Okay, so back to the video.
Of course it was, since you would make
Has
sure
a
that they
closet.
would make nothing and would in effect be dead in the water if they didn't. Then you manipulated the amounts of profits, dividends, and stock prices by mixing inferior ore with higher quality ore so that by the time it got to the mills, it wasn't worth its full value.
I didn't do that.
No, you're right. You had your people do it. And that's where all those nicely paid consultants, assayers, and geologists fit into the story. The stockholders never knew they were being robbed of their profits. Even other stockbrokers stupidly kept their accounts at your banks, giving you the opportunity to review their financial ledgers. Then, working from the other side and knowing how well each mine would be assessed, you sold shares in the mines with ores that were falling off before they became public knowledge. Then you would either send out a negative report of the company or impose an assessment to create a bear market and later buy back the shares at a reduced price. That also meant that you could ask for more collateral from people whose stocks were securing their loans, giving you more shares and more control over the mines. This also worked out for you with mines that were going to be making a good strike. You knew about it before the public and bought up shares before the price could be raised. You know, I've heard it said that to call you a piranha would be to insult the character of the fish.
Beg your pardon, a piranha?
You had assayers in your pocket that would stamp the value of a bullion bar lower than its actual value. Then, working from I'm so sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, people. Train of thought.
Inside out.
You had assayers in your pocket that would stamp the value of a bullion bar lower than its actual value. To make sure you had all sides covered, the bank also was able to purchase vast amounts of mountainside property on the east side of the Sierra Mountains, with its large quantity of pine trees and other timber, along with the timber and lumber companies and sawmills to supply wood for the mines, for fuel, and for shoring up the walls of the mines. You even built dams that controlled the flow of water, which moved the lumber.
I just knew what would be needed, and I was trying to protect my investors and the mine owners. I keep telling you, I was a great businessman.
And, as if that weren't enough, you switched one monopoly for another one. The Virginia and Gold Hill Water Company had all the rights to whatever water was available, and you bought control of that water company. You also won battles in court that kept ranchers in the Carson Valley from diverting water from the river so they could use it for irrigation.
I wasn't known as the king of the Comstock for nothing. Thanks to my keen business acumen, I had control over every aspect of life on the Comstock. I was the greatest power in the valley.
Yes, and with that power, you were able to buy judges, threaten or coerce witnesses, and bribe or threaten elected officials just to get what you wanted.
Well, twice in my life, I lost everything. I wasn't going to let that happen again.
Then your first try at the Senate, you started a rumor that John P. Jones, who had been the superintendent of the Crown Point mine, had set that awful fire in the Yellow Jacket mine just to manipulate stocks. Thankfully, no one believed you, and he was elected senator. Then Mr. Mackey and his partners, who managed to not be controlled by you, thank heaven, made their tremendous strike in 1873 and broke your control over the area. You made your second try for the Senate when William Stewart decided to retire.
Yes, and I was better prepared this time. That rag of a newspaper, the Territorial Enterprise, kept spreading lies about me. So I showed them. I bought the newspaper and I fired the editor, Joseph Goodman. You know, it's amazing how positive the news was after that. I won handily over Adolf Sutro.
Yes, and you were a shameful and ineffective senator. Even though you were chairman on the government's Committee of Mines and Mining, your participation was, at best, superficial. Even with your gift for oratory, you took part in no debates or discussions having to do with silver and the monetary system. You missed 1,466 out of 1,588 roll calls in Washington, which meant you weren't there 92% of the time.
Look, as I said before, my wife was sick and I had to tend to her. Plus, William Sharon suddenly died after he decimated the assets of the Bank of California, and I had to try to rebuild the bank from his debacle.
In your absence, the railroad continued to thrive for many decades, until it had to declare bankruptcy in 1938. It was able to keep going for a little while longer, thanks to interested railroad fans and the sale of some equipment to studios in Hollywood. The V&T's last run was in May of 1950, although, thanks to Hollywood, the V&T has appeared in over 125 movies, commercials, and TV shows.
Ooh.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed our trip down memory lane and the story behind the V&T, the Comstock Lode, and of course, me.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
Graduation.